The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's a situation, well, many of us might feel it's just so deeply entrenched.
Yeah, intractable seems like the word sometimes. You look at the history, the politics, and progress feels distant.
Right. But today we're looking at something a bit different, a detailed, very technically grounded vision for a better future.
And what's surprising is that it's not just some far-off dream. It's packed with projects, things that could actually begin, well, potentially right now.
Exactly. While the news often gets stuck on the political deadlock, and understandably so,
hmm
there's this parallel effort to develop a really practical roadmap. We're talking concrete steps.
Yeah, tangible improvements to daily life for Palestinians, but also building the essential foundations for something more stable down the line.
So let's, for this deep dive, set aside the immediate political gridlock for a moment.
Okay.
We're going deep into this fascinating report. It's essentially a blueprint, laying out specific plans for infrastructure, for development.
Across 6 key sectors, which is crucial. It's not just one piece of the puzzle.
And this isn't just abstract hope. It details how change could be engineered, on the ground.
It's important to understand where this comes from. It's the RAND Corporation. They're known for objective analysis, long-term thinking.
Right.
And their goal here was to create a tool for dialogue, for rational planning. And significantly, Palestinian private sector businesses actually supported this study.
That's a really interesting detail. It underscores a drive from within the community, doesn't it? Investing in planning for a better future.
Absolutely. So the aim isn't rehashing old arguments. It's about offering this integrated technical approach, something that could support future diplomacy, maybe, but also, crucially, immediate economic development.
And Rand has looked at this kind of spatial planning before, right? Back in 2005, 2007.
They have. This latest work builds on that, taking a really comprehensive view. It looked at 6 interconnected sectors: governance, environment, cities, transportation, energy, and water.
And they even include illustrative plans for specific cities.
Yeah, 6 of them. And you see, that integration is key. You can't fix urban life without better transport, right?
Makes sense.
And a thriving economy needs reliable energy, clean water. The report really gets these interdependencies. It presents a cohesive vision.
Okay, so the core idea is you can't solve these things in isolation. A better power grid helps the economy, helps water management.
Exactly. It highlights the need for that integrated approach.
So for you, the listener, what should you pay attention to? We're going to try and pull out the most crucial, maybe the most eye-opening proposals, those sort of aha moments.
Without getting lost in all the technical jargon.
Right. We'll explore how this vision tackles the current challenges and what kinds of projects are actually envisioned. Some near-term, some more ambitious long-term goals.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with governance.
Right, governance. And the report doesn't, gloss over the complexity here. It acknowledges the reality. Well, the West Bank's fragmentation. You have areas A, B, and C. Then there's the isolation of Gaza and huge constraints on Palestinian building and resource management, especially in Area C.
That's about 60% of the West Bank Area C under full Israeli control. It really carves things up.
It does. Plus, there's no land connection between the West Bank and Gaza. And they've been governed separately since 2007. It's a fundamental challenge.
A very divided landscape, physically and administratively.
But the report's long-term vision, it has to assume, eventually, a contiguous and permeable Palestinian state.
Okay, that's the endpoint assumption.
But its immediate focus is narrower. It's on the parts of governance that actually enable infrastructure planning. Things like institutional capacity, rule of law, security, technical capabilities.
So building the framework for a functional state, even while the big political questions are still out there.
Precisely. Getting the nuts and bolts right.
All right, this is where it gets really interesting, the transformative projects. What are they suggesting?
Well, picture this. A phased transition to full Palestinian civil and administrative control across all areas A, B, and C.
Wow, okay. That's significant.
And then improved border crossings, strategically placed, connecting Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, designed for easier passage of people and goods to neighbors. They even think about managing air and seaports eventually.
So focusing on flow, on movement.
Exactly. And the practical stuff that makes it work. Supporting trade agreements, clear laws for crossing, efficient taxes, using technology to speed things up at the border.
Right, less waiting, faster trade.
And also, critically, upgrading the Palestinian government's capacity, helping them make informed decisions on land use, infrastructure, natural resources.
And they mentioned international support for this.
Yes, specifically for a new Palestinian spatial planning institution, plus upgrades for security forces, communications, IT, cybersecurity in both the West Bank and Gaza.
Okay, that's the big vision, but what about now? What's feasible soon? Any quick wins?
The report does identify some. Things like capacity building for the Ministry of International Cooperation and Planning. They're already involved in Gaza reconstruction coordination.
So, strengthening existing structures.
Yeah, and ongoing upgrades to crossings like Allenby Bridge. Also, expanding a UN Habitat pilot program on land tenure. That's really crucial for future investment, sorting out who owns what.
Okay, let's shift gears now to the environment. The report paints a concerning picture here, I understand.
It does. You've got a semi-arid climate, very vulnerable to climate change impacts. Plus, existing issues like overpumping groundwater, deforestation, soil erosion.
And the situation in Gaza adds another layer entirely.
A massive layer. The report flags the urgent need for rubble removal. The estimate back in April 2024 was 37 million tons.
37 million tons.
Yeah, and at the current pace, they reckon it could take maybe 14 years to clear.
14 years, just for the rubble.
And then there's contamination. Explosive hazards, unexploded ordnance, estimated 7,500 metric tons in Gaza alone. In both Gaza and the West Bank, it's a huge problem.
That's just hard to comprehend the danger that represents on the ground.
Absolutely. And add to that, poor solid waste management generally. Nearly half of all waste ends up in unsanitary dump sites.
So the vision has to be more than just cleanup, right?
Much more. It's about deeply integrating environmental thinking into all planning, accounting for climate change from the start.
I saw something about riparian parks.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept. Developing parks along the wadis, the seasonal riverbeds, that act as ecological bridges, green corridors, but also provide real quality-of-life benefits for nearby communities.
Nice idea. And waste management.
A total rethink. Rationalizing waste treatment, landfills, bringing in recycling, waste-to-energy technologies,
Modernizing the whole system.
and establishing dedicated environmental zones, agricultural development zones to push sustainable practices, boost food security, and a regulatory agency to coordinate managing natural resources.
Okay, and the immediate steps. What's feasible now?
Things like building solid waste transfer stations. They could go in areas A and B, or maybe less sensitive parts of Area C.
Practical steps.
Developing the regulations for better solid waste management is another one. And of course, as soon as practically possible post-war, starting that immense task in Gaza, the rubble and the unexploded ordnance.
A monumental undertaking. Okay, let's talk about cities. Population growth is a huge factor here, isn't it?
Massive. The population in the West Bank and Gaza more than doubled between 1990 and 2024, reached 5.6 million. That means very high density.
And disjointed growth.
Yeah, especially because of those Area C restrictions preventing infrastructure development where it's often needed. Puts pressure on environmental resources, too.
And then there's Gaza post-war. The displacement, the destruction.
It's devastating. 1.9 million people displaced. Over 60% of homes, 80% of commercial buildings damaged or destroyed.
And the debris estimate there is even higher.
As of August 2024, the estimate was 42 million tons. Again, potentially 14 years to clear. And remember, Gaza faced huge reconstruction challenges before this latest conflict.
Right, so the urban vision in the report has to address all of this.
It does. It focuses on accommodating growth, using best practices, respecting the environment, and crucially, planning without the constraints of areas A, B, and C.
Aiming for quality of life, prosperity, mobility, safety.
Exactly. While minimizing sprawl and environmental damage. Creating spaces for economic growth, recreation, tourism, even national pride.
And I read about a hierarchy of cities.
Yes, a clear structure. Main cities, secondary, tertiary, all connected. And fascinatingly, plans for several new cities along the Jordan Valley.
New cities, what would they focus on?
Things like agro-industry, ecotourism, recreation, really leveraging that area's potential.
How would they make this happen structurally?
Through development zones, mid and high density, mixed-use areas near transit hubs. Transit-oriented development is a priority.
Where specifically?
Gateways to major cities. Hebron, Jerusalem, Nablus, Ramallah, Gaza City. Also key secondary cities like Jenin, Qalqilia, Jericho. Plus urban renewal in existing centers, including that huge task of rebuilding Gaza City. And of course, building those 3 proposed new cities in the Jordan Valley.
Okay, ambitious stuff. What about smaller, quicker actions for cities?
The report mentions those too. Inexpensive things like placemaking in West Bank towns, reclaiming derelict lots for small parks, for example.
Simple but effective.
Linking transit investment better with land use at existing bus terminals. Upgrading basic urban infrastructure. And maybe building some symbolic state-building projects, an area, a performing arts center, a national museum, hospitals.
Building institutions people can see.
Right, and leveraging public-private partnerships in existing industrial zones. Jenin, Tulkarem, Jericho, Hebron, and starting to develop tourism hubs.
Lots of potential there. Okay, let's move to transportation. What's the current picture?
Fragmented, poorly planned, poorly repaired. That really hinders movement within the West Bank, between the West Bank and Gaza, and with the region.
And the checkpoints and settler-only roads.
Big factors. They create huge uncertainty, unpredictable travel times, which really hurts the economy. Access to the international economy is very constrained, and there's a lack of modern tech for managing transport.
And no real coordination between the PA and Israel on plans.
Often uncoordinated, yes, with Israel sometimes investing in separate segregated roads. And the report mentions hundreds of movement obstacles, checkpoints, roadblocks.
You mentioned a number earlier.
In 2023, 565 such obstacles were documented. That gives you a sense of the scale.
So the vision must be about connection, freedom of movement.
Exactly. Reliable, convenient, secure, multimodal transport. Free movement within Palestine, with neighbors, internationally.
Multimodal meaning?
A high-quality mix. Bus rapid transit, BRT, intercity rail, even heavy rail to Gaza eventually. Improved roads, new ports, maybe an airport down the line. And transit hubs as centers of activity.
What are the big transformative projects proposed?
An extensive public transit network using BRT to connect cities and villages. An interurban light rail line connecting major population centers in the West Bank and Gaza.
Light rail connecting the West Bank and Gaza.
That's the vision. And a new heavy rail network running through the Jordan Valley down to Gaza. Plus, developing trade corridors, logistics hubs, efficient customs at borders. Multiple new strategic border crossings are proposed.
And longer term.
Eventual transportation permeability between Israel and Palestine, allowing Palestinian access to Israeli labor markets.
Okay, huge plans. What about the near term for transport?
Building institutional capacity. Better coordination between existing bus and taxi services, for example. Supporting micromobility, things like e-scooters, shared bikes.
Modernizing the ministry itself.
Yes, a reimagined transportation ministry using best practice technology. Implementing DR key lines for intercity mobility first. Intercity buses linking to new multimodal hubs at city edges. And incremental but important upgrades to key roads.
Makes sense. Step by step. Now, energy. What are the challenges there?
Inadequate supply, inadequate infrastructure, near complete dependence on outside energy sources, mostly Israel.
Right.
Insufficient transmission infrastructure, fragmented utility governance. The PA has renewable energy goals, 33% by 2040, but there are big constraints.
Like what?
Well, the Jenin power plant is stalled, partly because it depends on gas from the Gaza marine field, which hasn't been developed.
Complex interdependencies again. What about renewables? Solar, wind.
Solar has huge potential. Utility-scale projects are possible in Area C, rooftop solar in areas A, B, and Gaza. Wind is more limited, average wind speeds aren't ideal, and again, jurisdictional issues in Area C for large turbines.
So the vision for energy is?
A robust, resilient sector. Adequate supply, promoting self-sufficient economic development, using diverse sources, domestic and imported.
Tapping into renewables more?
Definitely. Full exploitation of solar, wind where feasible, waste to energy. And using those Mediterranean gas resources off Gaza. Plus, a big focus on energy efficiency, especially in Gaza's reconstruction.
What are the major projects proposed for energy?
Large-scale solar deployment. A new fuel terminal at the Gaza seaport. Offshore gas exploration near Gaza. Upgrading existing power plants, building new ones like that Jenin waste-to-energy plant.
And connecting everything up.
Crucial. New transmission lines, distribution networks, substations, pipelines, including connections between the West Bank and Gaza, and also strengthening connections with Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. And finally, a single power authority to manage distribution.
Okay. Feasible first steps in energy.
Focusing on legislative and regulatory reforms. Things to stabilize prices, improve bill collection, updating building codes for energy efficiency, and developing the frameworks needed for planning, investment, and operations later on.
Got it. Last sector, water. Sounds like another area with daunting challenges.
Absolutely daunting. Insufficient access to fresh water is the headline. Then there's the disproportionate use of shared aquifers by Israel. Repairs are hobbled by restrictions on dual-use materials.
And Gaza's water infrastructure is severely damaged now.
Severely. Plus, inadequate sewage infrastructure you mentioned, half of Ganzar's lacked connections even before the recent conflict. Poor water distribution management leads to huge leakage.
How much leakage?
Estimated 41% loss back in 2016. 41%. plus illegal connections. It makes the system financially unsustainable, over $320 million in outstanding debts in 2021.
Wow. So the vision here has to be comprehensive.
It is abundant water access at global standards, efficient, sustainable, cost-effective management, Palestinian stewardship of resources, universal sewage connections, properly managed, using recycled greywater, say, for agriculture, fair pricing, and joint management with neighbors for shared water resources using international best practices.
What kind of projects would get them there?
At least 22 new wells proposed, plus new dams, a new national water carrier pipeline along the West Bank ridgeline, new connection points to Israel's water system, and developing, repairing, expanding over 24 wastewater treatment plants across the West Bank and Gaza.
For safe discharge and reuse.
Exactly. For irrigation, environmental purposes, closing the loop.
And the doable now, steps for water.
Institution building is key. Upgrading and repairing distribution pipes to cut leakage, improved monitoring, studying water allocation, maybe shifting away from really thirsty crops, empowering farmers with sustainable techniques,
Smaller infrastructure projects.
building local service dams and wells where it's uncontroversial, supporting local-scale desalination tech, and, like energy, legislative and regulatory reform, especially for wastewater reuse and fixing sewage networks.
Okay, so just to recap this deep dive, this RAND report, it's incredibly comprehensive, isn't it? An ambitious vision, but packed with really concrete, detailed projects across all these vital areas.
Yeah, and it's got that dual focus we talked about, improving daily life now as much as possible, while also laying the essential groundwork for a potentially more stable, prosperous future.
What really stands out is the emphasis on practical, incremental steps.
Exactly. Many of these things, as we've discussed, could potentially start relatively soon, even with the political complexities. It's about finding technical solutions, looking for win-win opportunities where possible.
It offers such a different lens, doesn't it? Focusing on the tangible development, the infrastructure, as maybe the foundation you need before you can build something more positive politically.
It makes you think about the sheer scale, the interconnectedness of it all, and the potential impact on just everyday life for people there.
Which leads to a final thought, perhaps for you, the listener. Considering this level of detailed technical planning, what becomes possible if the focus shifts, even partially, from those seemingly insurmountable political barriers?
Towards the practicalities.
Yeah.
Towards actually building a functional, thriving society on the ground.
Or put another way, if even now, amidst everything, such detailed plans for a better future are being developed, what does that tell us about the enduring hope, the determination maybe for a different reality in the region?
It's definitely food for thought. And if you want to explore this further, the full report is available on the RAND Corporation website.
Absolutely. We highly recommend taking a look if this has sparked your interest. It's truly fascinating material.
If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more, like, share, and subscribe to our Substack. There you'll find our report guide, a summarized breakdown of each section of the report discussed today, alongside a link to the full report itself. Stay informed, stay ahead. Missilenet.com